So yes, I'm Derek Yu, as Peter mentioned, founder of Moonbeam. I was looking forward to this talk because a lot of the talks I give are a little bit more technical in nature. I'm usually speaking with a developer audience, and so I thought this was an opportunity to talk about some higher level themes, some things that I've been thinking about, just working in the space here for the last couple of years on the project Moonbeam. And so I really wanted to talk today about the idea of blockchains as community computers. Blockchains as kind of creating economies. We touched on some of these themes actually in the last talk on the panel I was on, but I really do think that thinking of these things like their community computers, like their economies, is like a helpful way to think about where we are now and where things may move into the future. So let's unpack this a little bit. What do I mean when I say a community computer? It's kind of a weird expression. And so what I mean about this, this word community, you hear it a lot in blockchains. And I think people sometimes dismiss it as kind of this fluff that gets talked about. But I've really come around to the view, having this project and seeing it from its inception all the way to Moonbeam's mainnet launched in January this year, that this kind of community aspect to the blockchain, right? The blockchain is this thing that gets this community of people and actors and other kinds of participants around it, that they're kind of inseparable, right? So I think this is where when you see blockchain projects that have a more technical view, that a blockchain is just this piece of technology that we can use, Web 2 companies can just use it to solve some kind of problems. I think this lack of community is part of why those projects struggle. And so when I think of blockchains as a community computer, what I mean is that you have this community of participants around this blockchain. It's a computer in the sense that different software can be deployed to it. And it's not owned by any one entity. It's collectively owned by all of the members of this community around it, right? That's what, when you have tokens on a blockchain and that community owns tokens, it really is around this collective ownership, unlike existing models, like Web 2 models, where the infrastructure might be owned and operated by a single one or two different players. And so to think about making one of these things, I've gone through the process myself with the rest of the team in creating one of these things. This has changed a lot over time, right? And so at this point, there's some number in the hundreds, let's say, of blockchains. Historically, this has been very, very difficult to do, right? This is like a very technically challenging thing to undertake, to make a blockchain. I would say historically this has required PhD level cryptographers and other computer scientists to actually understand what it would take to build these like lower level components, so peer-to-peer networking, consensus-like mechanisms, and other things. We're at a moment now where this is changing substantially. So whereas a few years back you needed this kind of crack expert team to do this, now a lot of that knowledge that those people had has been put into software development frameworks. Frameworks, one example of which would be Substrate, which is the framework that's used to build Polkadot chains. And so there's just this incredible amount of knowledge that's gone into this framework so that, as a team, you need much, much less expertise to build one of these things. You can use the framework to build your own blockchain in a very small fraction of the amount of time and effort that it historically took. And we're right at the beginning of this change where now the ability to make your own blockchain has really been democratized quite a bit and made accessible to even relatively modest-sized teams are able to build their own blockchain. And the cool thing about building your own blockchain is it's this amazing experiment you can run, right? So you're literally setting up like your own virtual economy, right? So you have some rules you're going to put into the system around the tokens, like what the issuance is, what the initial distribution is, any other mechanism, like staking mechanisms a lot of chains have. So it is this pretty amazing opportunity to kind of create this petri dish, this experiment that it takes like some amount of time for it to run, and to see what happens with this experiment. And so in that context, just want to talk just briefly about Moonbeam as an example of one of these experiments in creating a community computer, in creating an economy. It's been about 4 months since we launched. We launched in January this year, so it's still relatively early for us. But already we have quite a number of teams that are deploying different protocols or different software to the platform. We've built up a community basically around the system, about 5 million transactions. And really the key thing for Moonbeam, for those of you that were here in the previous talk, is that we are really emphasizing interoperability with other blockchains, right? So this is a big theme of the day. Moonbeam is a smart contract platform that really focuses on that and engineers into the chain itself cross-chain integration, so that when a builder is coming and wants to build an application that spans multiple blockchains, Moonbeam has been purpose-built for that use case. So they have all of these tools available to them that they can use to build an app that spans multiple blockchains. Those could be within the Polkadot ecosystem, leveraging specialized functionality from chains that are within Polkadot, or even outside of Polkadot if they're trying to reach other destinations like Ethereum mainnet and things like that. My belief is that we're at the beginning of a big shift in the way apps are being built, that almost all of them are going to be natively multi-chain in the future. And so that's kind of our bet on being at the leading edge of that shift as it happens. I want to go back now, though, to just complete this thinking around blockchains. We talked about blockchains being, you can think of them as a community computer, but they really also are economies. And so I want to dig into what does that mean when I say a blockchain is an economy? And really it comes down to this notion of having tokens which are like this shared, that have this shared value, right? The community members around your blockchain kind of imbue value into the tokens. And then while the blockchain at its lowest level may have simple methods of exchanging value between community members, really the software element of things, like all of these teams that are deploying software onto Moonbeam, are creating much, much more elaborate ways for value to be exchanged in different and novel ways. And this is where I would say on a daily basis, I'm interacting with teams that have new ideas about how that value can be exchanged. And it's at this point now where I would say people will look back in this time and realize just how much innovation and thinking was happening now. Every day when I get up, it could be that I change my thinking and my previous ideas from the day before based on a conversation with a team. There's really a lot of experimentation going on, particularly in decentralized finance. People working on different kinds of on-chain organizations, DAOs. There is a lot of experimentation happening right now, and it's not clear what the best ideas are. I think you probably will fast forward 20 years from now, it'll become clear what the best ideas were, and things will consolidate around those good ideas. But right now, there's just this huge variety of ideas, which makes it pretty exciting, actually, to be in the space and having all those conversations. To just zoom in a little bit on just take decentralized finance. Here, there's already been a first wave of innovation that largely happened on Ethereum mainnet. So there I'd highlight things like decentralized exchanges, lending and borrowing protocols, different vaulting mechanisms. And what we're starting to see now is all those ideas are equally applicable on other chains, but we're starting to see a new wave of multi-chain or cross-chain ideas that people are pursuing. And so again, with Moonbeam's specific focus, we're a natural landing spot for those kinds of natively multi-chain use cases. So this idea of blockchains as economies, I think this is a powerful idea, that the way that you set up the system, the way you set up the underlying parameters, the kinds of protocol teams that are deploying software into this, onto the blockchain, really does create something that looks like an economy, right? You have a set of actors around it that are exchanging value in all these different ways. And so let's keep that in mind as I'm going through the rest of the presentation. And this decentralized organizations idea, there's a lot of innovation happening in this area also, right? So the idea here is that kind of instead of a standard corporation that you would work for or have in the regular world, you now move that organizational structure onto a blockchain. And so what does that mean? Well, that means that, again, there's no separate group of people who are the equity holders of that thing, right? There's no formal governance structure like you'd have in a regular corporation with a board of directors and other things. It's governed by the token holders themselves on the blockchain. So it's kind of taking the idea that I was describing of the underlying blockchain itself, but applying it to an organization that has some purpose. And not all of them are work efficiently. I think there's still a lot of working through the kinks, but I can see a lot of adoption happening on this. And I do think that these are going to be something that will be quite prominent in the future as people become members of probably more than one of these DAOs as part of their daily life, right? As part of what they do for work. So to touch on some of the themes that we discussed on the previous panel around cross-chain interoperability and connectivity, with this mental model that each of these chains is its own economy, they have largely been isolated, right? So almost without to a point, if you have a blockchain, by default it's isolated. It's like one of those prehistoric economies, right? That was unconnected to the outside world, right? They've had to figure out how to build all of the things themselves locally. And you kind of have to be minimally good at everything to kind of service the basic needs of whatever your community is around you. And so we're at a moment right now where these are just starting to be connected with each other. And so I sometimes have this, this mental model of the explorer from like a long time ago who like ventured on some like undiscovered place, and then all of a sudden that economy was connected right to the rest of the world. And Polkadot is a great example of a technology that's really allowing for this cross-chain connectivity to happen in a highly secure way with their XCM technology. And so I think that this is going to drive a lot of change in the next 12 to 24 months as this like secure connectivity is established between these different economies. I think of them, you can think of them as trade routes, right? So there's these trade routes that are being established now between these different economies which were previously isolated. And so some of the things that I expect to happen that are the big unlocks from this, one is around specialization. We spoke about this in the previous panel a bit, that when you have trade routes and an ability to interact with other economies, that allows you to specialize. You can move out of this mindset of, oh, okay, I have to kind of locally service, the users that I have, to the best of my ability. You can say instead, like, you know what, we're going to focus on, a particular set of services and be great at those. I can optimize my whole blockchain to be, designed to service those use cases. And then for the things I'm not good at, I can rely on other people that are specializing in those things and acquire them, from those other chains. It's a simple idea, but it is largely not happening yet. And I do expect this to happen. And it's going to change the landscape quite a bit, because by specializing, you can become a lot more efficient at doing any one particular thing. There's not only an efficiency, but there's also this other knock-on effect of being able to improve the user experience, right? So the user experience in blockchains is challenging right now, right? I mean, I think most of you that are using blockchains may know this, that it requires some level of understanding of the systems you're interacting with. I liken it to the early days of using like internet-based applications. The user had to have a lot of knowledge about modems and connections, ISPs, all these different concepts you had to understand to be able to use the internet effectively. That's kind of the mode that we're in now with blockchains. You have to understand MetaMask and wallets and a lot of different infrastructural components. But this connectivity, I think, is really going to lead to an ability to hide complexity away from the user, which will simplify the user experiences. So that's another big kind of unlock or kind of benefit to this connected chains approach that I'm excited about. And so, in the context of Polkadot, right? So, like, what does this mean, and what does this mean for Moonbeam? So I mentioned at the end of the last panel I was on is I do see a certain kind of trend moving forward in the blockchain space, where there's kind of at the same time an expansion and a consolidation. So let me explain what I mean by that. I think there's going to be many blockchains in the future, right? These are like computers, right? So it's like saying, how many computers are there going to be? Well, there's going to be a lot of them, right? There's going to be a lot of workloads that are coming, decentralized workloads that need to be serviced. So I do expect there to be a lot of blockchains. But at the same time, I think there's going to be a shrinking set of technologies that are used to power those blockchains, because it takes a lot of effort to create these development frameworks and technology stacks that are used by developers to interact with these things. And so one of those places where I expect consolidation is around Polkadot and its substrate technology. That was a big bet that we made. It's been purpose-built to have this kind of connectivity in mind that I was speaking of. And I think there's also going to be other consolidations around Cosmos and its IBC technology, around EVM, like the Ethereum and its EVM technology. There's going to be pockets of concentrations of connectivity and developer activity. And so, but in that context, it's quite strategic for us to be positioned within this Polkadot ecosystem and kind of be a little bit of a gateway, right? So when you think about trade routes, if we're connecting to a lot of external destinations, but also then have this rich connectivity into the Polkadot ecosystem, it kind of makes for a strategic position, for Moonbeam, if you think about it from a kind of trade routes perspective, right? So if there's going to be movement or kind of interaction between these different chains, we're trying to position ourselves strategically at a key point where I think there's going to be a lot of messages, a lot of cross-chain trade and activity happening. And so that's a bit about our strategy and how we're positioning ourselves. And so just let's dig in a little bit more to just some actual use cases. We're still early. Moonbeam itself launched in January. XCM technology, the cross-chain technology on Polkadot launched this month, so it's really not that old. But there already are a number of use cases that are already up and running. One of them I'll mention are what we call XC20s. So you might not be surprised to hear that one of the first use cases that people wanted with this generic messaging capability, this generic interoperability technology, was token movement, right? So there's a reason why bridges powering token movement use cases was the first thing that came into being, because that's one of the natural things that users want to do. So we did implement our version of this cross-chain tokens using Polkadot's XCM technology. The neat thing about this is that XC20 tokens can move around freely between any of the Polkadot parachains, so any of the blockchains within the Polkadot network, with very, very high security, no additional security assumptions like other bridges are making. But when they're on Moonbeam, we're providing this EVM and Ethereum-like environment for ease of developer use. And so when those tokens are on Moonbeam, they appear as if they're ERC20 tokens. So that allows developers to work with them quite easily. And so that's one of the first features that's already been shipped, and we're already seeing quite a bit of adoption on. We also have other use cases that, in particular in the decentralized finance area, where people are starting to leverage multiple chains simultaneously, like in their application. So again, I think the previous thinking, or kind of the thinking that's dominated, and in some ways still dominates today, is let me I'm going to pick one blockchain, let me build an application for that blockchain, and then let me get all my users and all assets that I want to work with to that one blockchain. That's I would say the old and maybe even existing style of thinking. The new style of thinking is, how can I use the functionality from multiple chains to power my app? And so that's where we're starting to see a lot of interesting activity. We already have some shipped use cases that take that form, and that's the form I think a lot of software will take moving forward. I gave the example previously of Lido in the last talk, so let me focus on this lending and borrowing use case. So in the lending and borrowing use case, the idea is, instead of asking users to co-locate all of their assets onto one chain and come to one chain, instead you have a multi-chain system where a user might deposit assets on chain A, but then that entitles them to a withdrawal on chain B, right? So you can supply on one place, and then maybe you can borrow out on another place that has the assets you want to borrow, or is the place where you want to use them. It's a fundamentally different way to build the application. You need this messaging capability to connect the different parts of your app. But I do think that it has a great amount of benefit, right? If you think about this decentralized finance use case, it tends to get fragmented, right? You have these different installations on different chains that are totally isolated and can't talk to each other. And a lot of these DeFi apps, they benefit from being able to pool and aggregate deposits or TVL as they call it, into one location. So I do think there's going to be a great benefit to decentralized finance applications that adopt this multi-chain approach. And then on the cross-chain NFTs and gaming side, this does continue to be an area where we are seeing quite a bit of demand and adoption, where people want to have NFTs, but maybe give utility to those NFTs. So even if an NFT started life on Ethereum mainnet, it might be the case that users will transfer that NFT to Moonbeam, and there they can give it utility, right? They can make it useful. They can make it useful in a game. They can make it useful in other ways. And so I see this distinction of, again, it doesn't have to just stay put where it started. Things can start to move around, and you can start to give things utility in a place where it makes sense to do so. So just a few cross-chain use cases. And so just to kind of step back onto some of the themes that I spoke about at the beginning, back to this idea of blockchains as community computers. I mean, this is, for those of you that are in the Web3 space, you already start to feel this, that I'm involved with many projects, right? I'm part of a whole bunch of different Discords and Telegram groups. I'm already kind of a community member of a lot of different communities. And I think the blockchain aspect, it makes it different, right? When you have some kind of economic stake in what's going on. A lot of people have hobbies, they might be in chat groups, but without this economic substance, it has a little bit of a different feel. Once you add the economic substance, I think it really does change the way that you interact with these different communities. And so, my belief is that we're at this time when, it's the case that people are increasingly thinking of themselves as belonging to many different communities at the same time. And I'm quite confident that those communities are going to ultimately be backed or kind of have a blockchain underneath them to provide this economic value. And so, I think of this quote from William Gibson that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. I think that for those of us that are in this space, we're kind of feeling this. And sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, right? Because you're kind of dealing with like many different interactions at the same time. But I'm quite confident that this is the way that things are going to move, like even for regular people in the real world. That it might be the case that it's not just primarily your citizenship and your primary job that are your primary two communities. You may be involved with many of them. And we're already starting to see that even in the Moonbeam community. There's people that are full-time now working for DAOs, working for other projects that are in our ecosystem. Like that's their whole job. So this is something that I think about and I think is going to be ideally a big unlock, for a potential, like where people are able to do things they really want to do. And if I kind of step back, a little bit to the, even higher level than that, I see the work that we're doing here as part of a larger trend. That trend largely in my mind is around, there's this old expression that came from Mark Andreessen, software is eating the world, right? So software is eating into all of these traditional forms that we had. And I really see blockchain as eating into finance in some of its existing forms. This shift from the physical to the virtual, the shift to software-based native forms, the shift from like local things to having global access, right? The community members can come from wherever they are in the world as long as they're capable and have the interest. I see the work that we're doing here as part of these like larger trends. And the opportunity that I see is that for all of this experimentation happening, there can be new forms that are created that have these interesting properties. They have these properties of being more efficient, being more transparent, perhaps being more inclusive. And I see again that like I like to think that this work that we're doing will ultimately be a big unlock for people to find maybe some meaning in their life and being able to work on things they really want to work on, rather than being forced to work on things that are the available opportunities they had to them just locally. So yeah, I think I'll end it there. Yeah.
And I think there's time for one or two questions. Maybe one question if anyone has a question for Derek.
Yeah, you were talking about there's a mic actually, so that the folks that are.
Thank you. Thanks for the great talk. Yeah, I was wondering about whether you think that all of the EVM chains, whether they have become a little bit redundant, comparing that to all the Polkadot Sama chains that are interconnected. It's not really the case with EVM chains. Do you see that space to keep on growing as well, or do you see most of them taking the course of Avalanche or Phantom with declining interest?
Yeah, so I have a few thoughts on that. One is that I separate basically, when you talk about an EVM chain, I separate the chain from the technology stack. So Ethereum as a chain obviously uses the EVM and uses these tools, but there's many chains that use those tools. So in my mind, it's the tool set or the technology stack is the thing that is going to have a lot of staying power. I mean, it took like many years of many people working on all these tools to create good ones. Those are in fact the tools you use when you're building on Moonbeam. But I do think that that when you talk about the different individual chains, those will probably become more commoditized over time, right? As I think of the cloud, right? Where it used to be servers were these things that you looked and cared for, and kind of polished off, and you love them, but now they're disposable, right? You kind of spin up many of them as you need for your workload. So I do think that it'll probably move in that direction. And so, yeah, this consolidation around certain tech stacks, I think, is going to happen around EVM tech stack, around Substrate and Polkadot, around the Cosmos SDK. There's certain frameworks that there's been a huge amount of effort put into, and those are very difficult to replicate. But at the same time, there's going to be many chains that are built using those technologies. So that's a bit of my view there.
Cool. Thank you very much, Derek. I think we only have time for one question. Everyone, please give Derek a round of applause.